Opposition leader Guaido has boycotted the votes. Joining us for more on that is Danny Shaw, a professor of Latin American Studies from Caracas, and we also have Ofelia Carrillo, the co-editor of Anti-Conquista. Welcome, welcome. Danny, if I can start with you. You're there in Caracas. What have you seen? What have you observed?
Well, first of all, it's amazing that we can't even have communication between Iran and Venezuela. This is very symbolic because this is exactly what the United States and imperialism does not want. They don't want any of the oppressed to throw the type of economic sovereignty or political sovereignty. And that's exactly what we witnessed here today. I'm here as an international election observer of the Venezuelan elections. And despite all of the challenges with COVID-19 and this pandemic, it's really plaguing us across the world, but specifically in the United States. It's amazing that they're calculating 45 to 60% of the population will come out to vote. Many opposition parties have participated. The extreme right wing, led by Juan Guaido, has not participated. They've never shown any interest in democracy. Yet the United States and their junior partners around the world and in Latin America continue to support Juan Guaido, which serves then as a justification to siphon off the billions and billions of dollars that the Venezuelans have in gold and gas and natural resources. Venezuela, along with Brazil and Bolivia, is some of the great prizes in South America. So that's really what this vote was about today, whether the Venezuelan people want to be led by puppets of the U.S., or they want to continue to have a strong socialist sovereign government.
Right. Let's bring in Ofelia. Ofelia, just touching on what Danny, who's there as an observer, has said and noted, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he has described the elections as a fraud and a sham. That's a direct quote from him. What do you make of that, considering what the White House, the Trump White House, has said about the U.S. elections on November the 3rd?
The hypocrisy is so blatant that, top U.S. officials would turn around and try and demean the Venezuelan robust democracy that they have in the country. To begin, it's a system that requires both an ID and a fingerprint. It's completely electronic. It has instituted Venezuela and President Nicolás Maduro and the Partido Socialista Unado de Venezuela has enacted strict COVID-19 measures, not only to protect voters, but to ensure participation. Things we know didn't happen in the U.S. election. So to turn around and try and say that Venezuela's National Assembly elections, which are happening today, would be a sham, and the irony of looking back a month ago to what happened here in the U.S., where voters were in line for hours, right, where folks couldn't get polls open because they didn't have the right amount of supplies in key states. We know that this is not the case in Venezuela, and you can look at the coverage on social media from Venezuela Analysis, from Misión Verdad, from folks who are on the ground like Danny, to see what Venezuela is really doing to ensure people not in a global pandemic can participate in an election of such significance and importance. The U.S. would do well to take some of the advice and logistics that Venezuela has put forth to carry out such a massive effort, especially under these unilateral sanctions the U.S. has pushed against Venezuela that is now, we know, affecting greatly the number of infections and transmissions that are happening in the country.
Indeed. And Danny, you're there as part of 1,500 observers and 300 representatives from 34 countries. Despite that, you've got some Western countries that are trying to discredit the election. Why would they want to do that?
So Ophelia correctly pointed out, the Pompeos and the Wall Street Journal and even the Guardian, which pretends to be more left-wing, have condemned this election before it even started or reached its conclusion. There's 277 National Assembly seats up for grabs today. Unlike the United States, where we had to wait weeks and weeks for the results, and some, including the president, or the bigot-in-chief Donald Trump still dispute the results, tonight, in about 3 hours, we should know the results of the National Assembly elections. This is very exciting that the Venezuelan people will now control Parliament. It remains to be seen what will happen with Juan Guaido on January 5th. Of course, the U.S. will continue to recognize Guaido. There's really two ecosystems of power here, the real Venezuela and then the Venezuela of illusions and fantasies that the U.S. and Guaido, their puppet, continue to maintain. In terms of on the ground here, pretty fascinating that a blockaded country, you can see all of Caracas behind me, somehow still found a way to have hand sanitizer, and they sprayed us down every time we went in and out of a polling station, something that I've never seen in New York City or across the U.S. As we know, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, the worker states have been the most effective at having a centralized, planned approach to combating this deadly pandemic. Meanwhile, in the United States, we've now exceeded 15 million total cases, and the death toll is hovering around 300,000. So it certainly is interesting to contrast people's democracy in Venezuela versus bourgeois democracy 1% in the U.S.
Right. Ophelia, the Maduro's government, Caracas, has called on Washington, or rather has called on U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to ease the sanctions against his country, against Venezuela. Do you see that happening?
This is the same man who was vice president under Obama's administration, where President Maduro was declared, a terrorist and a threat, to the United States. It's highly doubtful that someone like Joe Biden, although he positions himself as someone distinct as Donald Trump, we know both Democrats and Republican, when it comes to foreign policy, have by and large remained almost exactly the same, if not somewhat worse under Democratic candidates. Biden himself has said he met Maduro and outright called him a dictator, right? Someone who was popularly elected in a nationally observed nationally observed election 2 years ago, and is still very much supported by the Venezuelan people. So I think that it will be, sadly, probably more of the same. But I think the distinction here will be, having this National Assembly election and knowing where the Venezuelan people stand with President Nicolás Maduro and the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela. I think this will be a significant step towards bringing stability back to Venezuela, and also when we get the results, seeing where the Venezuelan people are.
Very interesting stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Let's thank our guest, Danny Shaw, Professor of Latin American Studies, who is in Caracas, one of 1,500 international observers to the Venezuelan elections. Ophelia Corralo, co-editor of Anti-Conquista, also joining us from Los Angeles. And dear viewers, thank you for joining this edition